All right, so this video is going to be a little bit different today. It's going to be a little bit longer. Today, we're getting into a little bit more of not just the technicals of lifting. This is going to be a much more in-depth, more philosophical video about lifting and fulfillment and your lifting social status and how you can actually get the most out of your lifting experience and how you can get the most confidence and fulfillment that we're all in it for in the first place. And I've gone through a bunch of different experiences with this, so I feel pretty qualified to talk about this. Obviously, I'm still young and I'm not where I want to be, but I have learned a ton in the years that I've been doing this, so I've got a lot here for you guys today. So let's get into it. So one of my newer lifting philosophies, and I am going to be making a bunch of different videos on this probably relatively frequently. This is still kind of a pretty new philosophy to me in the lifting community in general. So basically, a term I came up with about a week or so ago was your lifting social status. And this is something I've been kind of subconsciously conscious about for the past couple years, but I haven't quite articulated it into any thoughts or words yet. And this is just like kind of a rough draft, kind of a final draft of everything. I'd say a final draft of my current philosophy, but I don't think my philosophy on this topic is in its final stages yet. I still have a lot more thoughts that I have to go through and more time to think about this stuff. So with all that being said, let's get right into it. This is going to be a really cool video in my opinion, so definitely stick around. I think you guys will learn a ton in this video. So not sure what I'm going to title it yet, but as of now, it's going to be how lifting social status affects you. So to start this off, what is your lifting social status? It's how well you compare to others as well as the standards set by the community of lifters. There's a few different problems with this being your main focus in lifting, from a technical aspect and from a social aspect. So I have a few different parts. I have 3 different parts today. The first one's going to be the social aspect that we dive into a little bit. So I do want to start this off by saying I do think it's healthy and I think it's helpful to compare yourself to others. But we have to recognize our goals and our domain before doing so, or we risk losing track of our goals and falling for the trap of the community gatekeepers. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but we need to understand what our goals are and why we started in the first place, or we're just going to start following in other people's tracks and achieving goals that we don't care about. And I'll get into why that's such a big issue within the lifting community. So if your goal is to improve on your own personal goals as well as surpass others within the community to set new standards, you will fail those goals by copying others and submitting to the arbitrary standards of the community. You will never surpass someone else by following them, because by following them, that implies they are ahead of you, and obviously you would be behind them. So when you follow another person, in general, lifting is going to be so individual, and we all have a bunch of different little goals with a bigger overarching goal of why we started in the first place. And you're never going to be able to find someone to follow that has those exact goals as you. And even when you get so caught up in following somebody else's lifting philosophy, you start to kind of turn into them. And that's a pretty big problem that a lot of people face in this community, because as lifters, we're here searching for that fulfillment. We're searching for that confidence. And it's easy to kind of lose sight of what our goals are, because when you first start out, you just don't have that much confidence. So when you see somebody that you want to emulate or learn from, we tend to go a little bit too far. And I've experienced that myself. I'll be the first to admit that. And a lot of people do face that in this community. It's pretty obvious just by seeing comments and being involved with a lot of these people. A lot of people do just kind of cling to one person and copy them, and you're not going to get any fulfillment out of that. So let's see. If your goals are to just get closer to your personal goals without caring too much about surpassing others in the community or starting to become like a leader and set new standards, then it is a useful tool to follow others to an extent, because they can teach you things. So the problem lies when you start to copy the person that you follow rather than just use the tools they provide you. So it's definitely helpful to follow people because they can teach you things and it's super helpful, but there's a fine line between taking little bits and pieces from somebody's advice and following that person, as in they are in front of you and you are behind them forever. That's an issue, and that will not help you whatsoever. It will distract you from the path that you want to be on, because you're just following theirs instead. So when you follow someone just to copy them, you lose sight of your own goals. Bodybuilding can be so multidimensional that there is no one person we can just copy without sacrificing part of ourselves. We all have these unique individual goals, and we all train in slightly different ways and have slightly different goals that if you just copy someone, even if it's very similar to yourself, you'll start to lose a little bit of who you are and what your goals are. So part 2 is going to be the standards themselves. So the standards. The problem lies within the standards themselves, because this is what initially takes us off track of our goals, because we don't have any real solid standards. And do we need real solid standards to basically gatekeep a community of real lifters or fake lifters? We'll see. I'll talk about that in this video here. The standards we do have are typically strength standards for hypertrophy. I see this as an issue for 2 reasons. The first one being strength standards are arbitrary for hypertrophy, because strength in a lift is highly based on skill and experience, and there are so many different ways to grow. For example, a 315 bench for a big chest, that's something you'll hear all the time of. You just get a 315 bench, you're guaranteed to have a big chest, but you can get a big chest with, say, weighted dips while having a weak bench. So with lifting being so skill oriented, then why do we have a certain strength standard? It doesn't make a whole ton of sense, because if you have a really strong bench on, let's say you can do 275 for 10, but you've never done anything less than 8 reps, it's going to be pretty difficult for you to max out, at least without any training. And you'd make a significant difference by training 1 rep maxes, and you'd get some noob gains. That's a more technical argument that I have here about the standards themselves. Just doesn't make a whole ton of sense in my opinion. I've talked about this in the past. Let's see. So, and the second reason being strength, it isn't our goal. That's a pretty obvious one. While some of us training for hypertrophy eventually start to enjoy certain aspects of performance in the gym, for sure. Not gonna lie about that one. A lot of people do go from just hypertrophy to, oh, that lift's kind of fun, I'll try and get as good on that lift as I can, or as strong as I can on that lift. We end up losing sight of our hypertrophy goals when we put the community strength standards on a pedestal. So the next portion here is going to be part 3, and this is my philosophy. So my philosophy is that we need to reevaluate the standards that are set within our community. I don't think we should mix strength standards into hypertrophy and vice versa. Lifting is highly individual from a training aspect and from a goal aspect, and our community standards should be set up to respect lifters who achieve the goals that they set for themselves. One of the biggest pieces of my philosophy is it doesn't matter what your goal is, because when it comes to bodybuilding, it's so individual and it's so customizable. It's not like powerlifting where it is a hard number on a set lift that you need to achieve. Bodybuilding is completely customizable. You can achieve whatever physique you want, and I'm mostly talking about non-competitive bodybuilding too. This is just hypertrophy training in general. I mean, you can build whatever physique however you want it. So the fact that we have this broad spectrum of lifts and broad spectrum of physiques, and we say, okay, this muscle at this size achieved with these 3 big lifts is how you become a real lifter, like, just doesn't make any sense, at least in my mind. Before I get into my final point, I do want to discuss how I failed as a lifter before. I chased goals and standards that were set by others, and I couldn't figure out why I didn't have the confidence or fulfillment that the lifters I followed had. And this is actually pretty awful, and it happens to a lot of people. So the reason was because I achieved goals that didn't mean anything to me. So I ended up kind of following other people's goals, Obviously, when you're like heavily involved in kind of like a lifting community, like obviously I enjoy it a ton and I think it's cool. So when I was a younger kid, I would follow other people, and eventually it went from like, "Oh, I'll just follow their advice to like, oh, okay, that's how they train and they look pretty good. So I'll just do that." And then eventually you see this like collective mindset that all thinks the same exact way. And you kind of just get sucked into it, especially when you're new to it and you're a younger kid. So eventually I got pretty good at that way of lifting. And for myself, it was more of kind of like that like aesthetics power building community where it was mostly like sumo deadlifts, high bar squats, regular bench, get super strong on those and just kind of skip out on your arms. And I achieved some pretty good goals. Like I had a really good physique. Obviously I still train for my physique in bodybuilding, so my physique's the same, if not better. I'm just not as lean anymore. But my strength is way down, and that's fine because I achieved what I thought were strength standards that I needed to hit, and I started to become someone that was like a stronger lifter in the community. But I was like, why do I not have any confidence, or why do I not have any fulfillment from this? And it was because those weren't the goals that I set. Like I didn't actually care. I was just doing it because those were the standards I thought I needed to hit to see myself as a real lifter. And even if the entire community respected me because I had those certain lifting numbers, that doesn't actually mean anything because you get into lifting to improve yourself and build confidence and fulfillment for yourself, not for a bunch of other people that are also brainwashed to like think that you've done a good job. It just doesn't really bring anything to you. It doesn't really bring anything to the table. So that's kind of how I messed up. So um, here's my final point. At the end of the day, the real lifters are the ones that recognize their goals and stick to achieving them without any excuses. The way to achieve this is simple. Remember why you started in the first place. Go after that goal because it's pure and it hasn't been influenced by others. You came up with it whether you realize why or not. This is what transforms you into a real lifter. And you will have the confidence and fulfillment that the lifters you look up to have. So, one thing I've noticed throughout lifting and my experience with it is you get into the gym and you have your own goal. It hasn't really been like infected by anybody else. It hasn't been infected by a community that you don't really care about or anything. So I got into lifting to get bigger. And eventually I kind of started off sticking to that. And I was getting bigger and I loved the gym and it was just me after my goal, tunnel vision. And then you start to get influenced by other people and other perspectives. And then you get caught up in this community of people that just all think the same way and they all kind of follow one or two people that are like really good at their own specific goals. But then once you start to follow that, you think that you'll have that same confidence and that same fulfillment and passion for lifting that those people have, but it's just not the case because you guys have separate goals. The way to get to where you want to be is to really think about your goals. Really think about it. And you can't let other people influence what you actually want to do in the gym because that's taking away from your own goals. So you need to have the confidence and you need to have that just right mindset to stick to what you want to do, ignore the influence of the community and these arbitrary, pointless lifting standards that we have for whatever reason that are powerlifting standards in a hypertrophy bodybuilding community, and ignore that, focus on what you want to. And once you achieve the goal that you set for yourself, whether you realize why you set that goal or why you didn't, that's what turns you into a real lifter. So if your goal is to say, I don't care about any muscle except my arms and I want 19-inch arms, when you achieve 19-inch arms, that's the goal that you set. You will get confidence and fulfillment from achieving that goal. And that's how you turn into a real lifter because you have the confidence and fulfillment that attracts people to follow you and learn from you. So stick to what your goals are. The first step in this is going to be analyzing and just having some self-awareness and realizing, what are your goals? Do you really care about your squat numbers or do you care more about getting big arms? There's no goal is better or worse than another because ultimately it's what you want to do. If somebody tells you a certain lift or a certain goal is better, there's really no base for that. And even if, in a technical sense, being strong in the big three helped you more in day to day life than having a bigger physique, it doesn't actually mean anything because you don't care about that. So, first step is going to be have some self awareness, understand what you want, and the first thing that you get from this, the first benefit from realizing this is you'll get tested. So you'll get tested by the community. Oh, you skip chest or whatever. You don't train back, you don't deadlift, you don't squat. Once you stick through that, you build some confidence, you build some resilience, and you're a little bit closer to your goals. You're slowly becoming that leader in the industry and becoming kind of that best self that you set out to be. Once you start on that path, this is where you keep getting tested. It's going to be easy to say, oh, I don't have the genetics for that, or this person's better than me, or maybe these people are right. Maybe I should follow these certain strength standards that the community set arbitrarily. And once you can kind of fight back against that and stick with your own goals, that's kind of another step in the right direction. You'll be getting closer to where you want to be. And eventually that final step is achieving that goal. And then all of a sudden, you're where you want to be and you're a leader in the industry and people will follow you. And when I say leader in the industry, I don't mean you're like some fitness influencer, but I mean in your community, you're somebody that people respect and look up to because you achieved a difficult goal that you set for yourself. You stuck to it regardless of what other people thought, and you're creating new goals for other people that, if used properly, can help other people as well. So that's going to be the end of my philosophical rant for today. If you have any questions or can relate, definitely let me know in the comments. This stuff is super interesting, and like I said, this is just kind of like a random first stage of this philosophy. So yeah, let me know if you can relate or if you have any questions. Thanks for watching.